What's up? I am David Long. How y'all doing today? So, for those of you who don't know, Bruce Alderman recently started a Facebook group and a YouTube page called The Integral Stage. And basically the idea behind this is that the integral community has a lot of topics and a lot of subjects, but there's a lot of debate around. But a lot of our leaders in the integral community don't really seem to be stepping up and debating in this way. It seems like for the most part, they're more interested in selling their books and saving face. So it's been kind of up to the integral community itself to take up these topics and to debate them in public. So that's exactly what we're starting to do, and I'm really excited about this. So what I'm about to share is a clip from a recent talk that I was a part of on the Integral Stage, where we discuss states from different perspectives. So you're definitely going to want to subscribe to the Integral Stage here on YouTube, and you're probably also going to want to get on the Integral Stage Facebook group. You should check out the full-length original video because we're going to have a future talk where we all talk about each other's views. So this should be really interesting. I'm really glad to see more things like this happening in our community. It's much needed, and I feel really blessed to be a part of it. Big thanks to Bruce Alderman. You are the man, Bruce. This is also the last video I made with my old yin-yang background. I want to apologize for the audio-video quality, but without further ado, I hope y'all enjoy. What's up? How you doing? I am David Long. I am the founding member of the Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement. I'm also a YouTuber. You might know me from some of the integral content that I create. Today we're talking about states, and I'm going to start off by just telling you the difference between the more Wilberian, idealistic kind of understanding of states and the more emergentist, realist, Davidian versions of states. If you want to explore more the difference between what this is about, you can look up Davidian versus Wilberian integral, and there's a video on it that talks about other aspects of the map. Today we're just focusing on states. Also, there's a reason why I don't say idealistic versus materialistic, because we're all integralists here. We all include all four quadrants. Emergentist integralists include four quadrants, just like idealist integralists include four quadrants. Like emergentists aren't exterior quadrant reductionists, like Ken Wilber's not an upper left quadrant reductionist. So that's part of the reason why we avoid materialism as a label, because we don't just reduce everything down to exterior quadrants. And basically, this whole other worldview has a totally different way of looking at states. And so we've changed some of the names of the states because there are some idealistic assumptions rooted in the way that we talk about waking dream, deep sleep, and non-dual states. For example, normally integralists talk about gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual states. But gross and causal have a certain kind of connotation to them. The word causal implies the cause or root of it all, the source from which all of it comes. And this is that Buddhist idealistic assumption rearing its ugly head and coming up in the wording. Also, the word gross is kind of a negative term, sort of a put down on nature, like a gross base. It reflects some of the unhealthy versions of Buddhism that reject nature. So we talk about the states differently. It's waking, dream, deep sleep, and non-dual. And it's waking and nature, dream and archetypal, deep sleep and formless, and non-dual. So I'm just going to go through real quick and talk to you about what we think about these and how it's slightly different. So with the waking state and nature, it's different because we don't see nature as an illusion. We see the world of nature as primary. Reality is primary. We're part of reality. So then the dream state, or the archetypal state, is not the Bardo realm. It's not some ethereal realm between the world of form and the formless empty void, like this kind of middle position. Metaphorically, in terms of states, it kind of is. But the idea is that, as Joseph Campbell would say, all the worlds, all the gods are all archetypes in our collective unconscious. They're all aspects of ourselves that get projected outward. And so when we have dreams or when we talk about poetry, we interpret it in this archetypal, psychological kind of way. Now, when it comes to the formless, deep sleep states, we don't see that as returning to source. Like, we wouldn't see that as the absolute, and that all of exterior reality and all that kind of stuff is a projection or illusion that rests upon this formless state. The way that we see consciousness as emerging is nested within the material reality. Nested within reality. Looking at your turned off mind would be sort of similar to like staring at a turned off TV. That's no more going to tell you the absolute truth of reality than looking at a computer or a TV without any content on it. It feels good. It's definitely an achievement to be able to get control of and quiet your mind in that kind of way. But does it tell you the absolute truth? No, it doesn't. it shows you maybe pure subjectivity. That would be equivalent to saying that looking at your own upper left quadrant is the absolute truth. And so that's a form of reductionism. That's a problem. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about methodology, and then we'll talk about state training, and then I'll be done. Okay, so on the other side of this idea of tetra arising and quadrants going all the way down and back, there's this idea of emergentism. And so what's actually come up on the other side of deconstructing this idea of tetra arising is this idea of nested quadratic holons. I'll say it again, nested quadratic holons. So the idea is that in terms of the ontological or cosmological arising of things or the emergence of things, certain quadrants give rise to the other quadrants. So like in terms of ontological or cosmological primacy, we see that the exterior quadrants are primary. But we know that when it comes to epistemology, or trying to figure out what's going on out there in the world, that phenomenology and interior are primary, relative value systems through which we're able to see things embedded in a context. So it's reversed. And so there's all these other nuanced distinctions that are coming along with that too. And we're able to really parse the ways that the different quadrants relate to each other and which ones are primary in different contexts. I have a video about this as well, but I probably need to make another video about it. Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris have the talk where they're talking about epistemology and ethical priorities. And I think they would benefit from being able to parse these into different categories where in terms of epistemology, our phenomenology is primary, the upper right is primary in terms of cosmology or ontology. But in terms of priorities that we should care about, the greater good, the lower left, the big picture, that has primacy there. Where I'm going with this is that there's also a nested quadratic holarchy that applies to reliability or accuracy. And I think actually phenomenology is the least reliable or accurate methodology. Now, it's the most reliable way to get at your upper left quadrant truth, your feelings, what you thought, what you feel, but compared to some objective evidence, like if you were in the room and a camera is in the room and you're both recording what happened, I'm going to trust the evidence from the camera probably more than your subjective experience, because we know that memory is unreliable, that people don't really pick up on all that's going on. There's all these kinds of psychological factors that keep us from really being able to see things objectively. And so I'm going to trust the camera. I think it's more reliable. So I think that there's sort of a nested quadratic holarchy. Personal experience is the least reliable. Probably peer review and group think is probably the next highest reliable thing. And then facts and theories are probably more and more reliable. So we've talked a little bit about the strengths and limits of phenomenology. We know that phenomenology is overstepping its bounds when it tries to make claims outside of its quadrant. It's great at telling you what you think, what you feel, what your experience is, but it also has to be understood in the light of the other quadrants when we're talking about the big picture. And so that's where a lot of people go wrong. They think that they're understanding things in the light of their own personal experience, but what they don't realize is how their cultural conditioning and the ideas in which things are framed around shape the way that we see them. We take this for granted, and then we end up like Ken Wilber with a traditional Eastern dogmatic perspective that ends up coloring the integral map in ways that he can't even see. Okay, let's talk about state training, and then I'll be done. All right, so when it comes to the waking state, there's nature mysticism. There's this idea of seeing the web of life, everything around you, as the body of Christ, as sacred, as God in second and third person. That in itself gives you a worldview that sees everything and everyone as sacred. So that's an important way of thinking about a waking state spiritual practice. And for Wilber, this kind of nature mysticism is not really as high as this ultimate enlightenment. But I think that we'll see when we get to the non-dual part that they can actually be one and the same. And maybe this nature mysticism type of enlightenment is actually more awake and true to reality than the Eastern religious point of view. So one of the other major practices that we see in terms of this waking state is mindfulness practice and, practicing the power of now and a lot of that. And a lot of that is very shaped by Eastern perspectives as well. I really like the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about it, where he says that it's not that we use our minds wrongly, it's that we don't use our minds at all. The mind has kind of taken us over, and we mistake that talking voice in our head as ourself. So a lot of what the meditative mindfulness kind of practices in this area are trying to do are to quiet the mind, to disidentify with all that talking stuff, and to re-identify as this meta perspective, which witnesses those things. I actually think this is a major upgrade in terms of being able to develop a filter. I do think that it's kind of just a further development of the self, where the self starts to develop this kind of critical filter on the self. It starts to disidentify with the content of the mind, and this is when subject becomes object, as we say. This is a part of cognitive development. And so this is also why taking on a meditative practice can really help with one's cognitive development up to a point, as long as the spiritual context in which it's framed doesn't become a type of dogma or a hindrance to growth. Now, I think that this kind of meditative practice can go even further, not just to where you're being here now, but where you're not trapped by the content of your mind, and you can actually consciously create and put your mind to work on something. And so that you're aware of the content of your mind at this point. You're not getting caught in these negative downward spirals, but you're able to put your mind to work on different projects. And now you're in these creative upward spirals, willing things into existence from this higher perspective within yourself. So, of course, there are other practices too, but we're just trying to run through this stuff quickly. Okay, so let's talk about now the dream stuff. So not only do we have transrational poetry and this way of analyzing archetypes and deconstructing the traditions of the world, and even deconstructing the self, realizing that that's just an archetype. That's just a part that we play. That's all part of that ego construct awareness. And what we're doing when we dream is dipping down into this sea of archetypes. And a lot of times shadow images will come up. A lot of times higher self archetypes will come up. All the different potential archetypes on the path. When we realize that these are aspects of ourself, then we can start to work to integrate them more skillfully. So I think there's a lot of valid shadow work in the dream and archetypal realms, as well as healthy projections into the kind of person that we want to be. And a lot of meditative practices that go along with these kinds of states are things like Tonglen, where you practice visualizing, extending your compassion and care to further and further circles out. Very, very beautiful practice. I also use visualization techniques like for progressive relaxation to help me go to sleep, where I'll see myself taking deep breaths and slowly relaxing parts of my body and then submerging myself underwater and then pushing down deeper and deeper into the blackness. And through there, sometimes I'll go into a lucid dream kind of practice, where you can start to gain more creative control, even in these visualization dream states. And I think that can be really helpful. It's interesting because people talk about these things in terms of unfolding state stages, and you can see how practicing each one of them can help you in certain ways. I don't know, though, if it really has to be in a progressive kind of order like this. I think you could work on one and neglect the others, but I do think they help each other too. So let's move then into the deep sleep formless, nirvikalpa samadhi, nirvana, emptiness meditations. A lot of people practice sitting, and I think it can be really good and peaceful. I'm all for it. I'm personally more into the daily mindfulness practices and things like that, because a lot of it is a lot more practical in terms of daily life stuff. But it is good, I think, to take time and to sit and just turn off your mind. And it's interesting, the way that it works is that first, you close your eyes and all those talking noises will be there. You can start to practice quieting them out. And then all these images will arise. And then you can practice fading them to black or fading them to white, however you want to think about it. This is just my way of thinking about it. And then eventually you'll get there. And it's amazing. As soon as it happens, the mind just starts dumping all kinds of feel-good chemicals into your mind. I'm not a scientist, endorphins, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. And it's amazing. It's definitely a positive thing to do. I don't think it has anything to do with glimpsing the absolute truth or anything like that, but I definitely think that it has all kinds of personal and psychosocial benefits.
states. Let's talk about the non-dual perspective. I think there's a lot of confusion about this because people tend to think that if you don't believe in Wilber's Eastern idealism, then you're not going to be able to have a non-dual perspective. But non-dualism is including both the absolute and the relative truth. It's just different scales of reality and being able to hold both at the same time, where it really depends on what you think the absolute is. If you think in more the Eastern kind of way, then you're going to think about it in terms of intersubjective connection. We're all part of the ground of being. We all share the same consciousness, that kind of thing. But it still works from this emergentist perspective. The absolute is the universe in flux. We are interobjectively connected. We are the universe. We are energy in flux. Same kind of idea. So there's this big picture. I am the universe. I am frisky dirt. I am the cosmos, looking back at itself, starting to understand itself, coming alive, the universe becoming conscious. And I'm also David, and I'm in the world with you, and there's all these problems. So it's just different scales of reality and being able to hold both at the same time, where the universe is in flux, it's working perfectly. I'm a part of it, and I'm glad to be here. And also, I'm David, and I have my own unique ideas and limited circumstances and all that kind of stuff. And I'm also in this situation, and what am I going to do about it? So from a transrational perspective, you don't have to throw out these ancient dogmatic myths or these ideas about I amness or non-dualism. All you have to do is interpret them in a way where their metaphorical value cashes out in accord with how we know reality actually works. So we can speak about God in a way where we're talking about reality as sacred. We're talking about each other as sacred, nature as sacred. And we can talk about the non-dual in a way where we realize the absolute truth of our interconnectedness and our unity, and realize that we are the universe in flux, and that these are the hands and feet and the mouth of the universe. That still has the power and the fire of this poetry. In fact, it's better because it cashes out in accord with reality, because it helps us to be better for what actually is. It helps us to live for and as an expression of nature. So these ideas still work. The only other thing I would want to talk to you about today is psychedelics, but I don't think we have time for that. So I'll just tell you that I have an integral review podcast with my buddy Alyosha about it on my YouTube channel, speaking in detail about psychedelics and development from an integral perspective. Go check it out. Okay, so I think that pretty much sums up what I have to say about states. I hope that was enjoyable to you. And if it was, seek me out, find me on YouTube, look up the Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement or the I Am Dave Long Friends and Fans group, and let's talk about these ideas more. Peace.
Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. Also, subscribe to the Integral Stage and check out the full-length video. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.